On a sweltering Thursday afternoon in Franklin, Tennessee, the heat hung heavy in the air, almost palpable as it enveloped the small town like a thick blanket. Inside Sam's diner, the air conditioning sputtered and rattled, struggling to keep the interior cool against the oppressive warmth outside. The comforting aroma of fried catfish and cornbread wafted through the open doors, mingling with the low hum of conversation among the regular customers. Samantha Taylor, a 52-year-old woman with a warm smile and a steady hand, had just finished the breakfast rush. As she wiped down the last booth and poured coffee for her regulars without a hint of complaint, she felt the familiar urge for a break. Taking her usual afternoon pause, she stepped outside, leaning against the railing, and lit a cigarette to calm her nerves. Just as she took a drag, something across the street caught her eye. Two sheriff's deputies were pinning a man against a motorcycle. The man, wearing a leather vest and faded jeans, was visibly distressed. It was Jake Mitchell, a local who everyone affectionately called Tank. He often came by the diner, always tipping generously and never giving Samantha any trouble. But today was different. One of the deputies, a stocky man with a buzz cut and sunglasses, had Jake's arm twisted behind his back, while the other, a younger officer with a flushed face, barked orders that seemed unnecessarily aggressive. Samantha felt her heart race. "Are you kidding me?" she muttered under her breath. She crushed her cigarette and grabbed her phone, approaching the scene with a sense of purpose. "Hey, what's going on here?" she called out, her voice steady. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you," the younger deputy replied dismissively. Samantha stood her ground, holding up her phone. "It does now. I know this man. He eats at my diner." "He's resisting," the older deputy said, tightening his grip on Jake's arm. Jake, his face flushed and jaw clenched, protested. "I'm not resisting. I just stopped for water." With calm authority, Samantha stepped closer. "You better have a warrant or a good reason for treating someone like this in the middle of the street." A couple of passers-by slowed down, intrigued by the unfolding scene. One woman pulled out her own phone, ready to record. The atmosphere shifted with Samantha's presence. She was not yelling, but her voice demanded respect. The older deputy let out a frustrated sigh. "We got a call saying he looked suspicious. Possible gang activity." Samantha raised an eyebrow, her disbelief evident. "Suspicious? Do you know how many bikers come through here every week? That's not a crime. You're harassing a man for wearing a vest and having a beard." Jake murmured, "I didn't even say anything. I was just filling my bottle." "Let him go right now," Samantha insisted, her phone still recording. The younger deputy hesitated, glancing at his partner. "You picked the wrong person today," she added firmly. "Jake has always been respectful in my diner. If you have a charge, read it. If not, take your hands off him." Finally, the older deputy relented, releasing Jake's arm. "Fine, but if anything happens later," Samantha shot back, "it won't unless you start it." As the deputies walked away, muttering into their radios, Jake rubbed his wrist and looked at her, gratitude in his eyes. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did," she replied, her resolve unshaken. Jake nodded appreciatively and returned to his motorcycle, starting it up silently. Samantha lowered her phone, stopped the recording, and walked back to the diner, unaware that her actions would soon draw attention from not only the town, but the entire country. As Samantha walked back into the diner, the familiar chime of the door echoed behind her, a sound that usually brought her comfort. She wiped the sweat from her forehead with a paper napkin and caught a glimpse of Mara, the teenage waitress on the afternoon shift, peering over from behind the register. "Everything okay, Miss Samantha?" Mara asked, her voice laced with concern. "Yeah," Samantha replied nonchalantly, slipping her phone into her apron pocket. Just had to remind the law how things really work. The young waitress blinked in confusion, clearly wanting to know more. But Samantha busied herself with refilling the sweet tea pitcher, not wanting to dwell on the chaos outside. Outside, the atmosphere was tense. Jake had left, and the deputies had driven away. But the weight of their confrontation hung in the air like a storm cloud. As the evening crowd began to trickle in, Samantha uploaded the video she had recorded without hesitation. She didn't add any captions or tags. She simply wanted to share what had happened. Before long, the footage began circulating online. What started as a quiet diner incident exploded into something far larger. By midnight, the video had gone viral, amassing over 2 million views. Samantha had no idea about the storm brewing in the digital world until the following morning when a news van from Nashville pulled into the diner's gravel lot. Samantha was in the middle of flipping sausage links when Mara rushed into the kitchen, her eyes wide with alarm. "There are cameras outside," she whispered urgently. "They can wait," Samantha said, shaking her head. "I'm working. They can come in for breakfast or stay outside." The reporters didn't leave, but they didn't get a quote from her either. Instead, what Samantha received was a mix of reactions from the locals. Some regulars came in, giving her looks that said, "You didn't have to get involved." Others avoided eye contact entirely. However, there were also those who came in specifically to commend her for her bravery. "I saw the video," a truck driver remarked as he finished his meal. "What you did was bold. You've got guts." Samantha didn't see her actions as bold. She simply believed in standing up for what was right. Her diner was a place of respect, and she felt compelled to protect that. Later in the afternoon, a note appeared taped to her door. It simply read, "Stick to cooking." Frustrated but undeterred, she tore it down and tossed it in the trash, resolute in her belief that standing up for someone in need was far more important than avoiding conflict. As the chatter from the diner buzzed around her, Samantha felt a shift not just in her own life, but in the very fabric of her community. The ripples from her act of defiance were just beginning to spread, and she had no idea how profoundly they would impact her world. Later that afternoon, the atmosphere in Sam's diner had shifted. The usual hum of conversation was punctuated by an undercurrent of tension as the news of her confrontation with the deputies spread through Franklin. As the doors swung open, in walked Sheriff Thompson, a tall figure with a serious demeanor that commanded attention. He entered without a smile, flanked by 2 deputies who exuded the same air of authority. The moment he stepped inside, the lively chatter of the diner faded into a tense silence. Samantha, busy at the counter, looked up and met his gaze. "Sheriff," she said, her tone neutral, neither warm nor cold. She didn't want to show fear, but she could feel the weight of his presence. "Sam," he replied curtly, "we need to talk." He motioned toward a booth by the window, but Samantha remained behind the counter, refusing to budge from her station. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, trying to diffuse the tension. "No, thank you," he said, his voice low. He sat down, leaning forward as if to emphasize the seriousness of the conversation. "That video of you confronting my deputies, it's everywhere. Do you understand what kind of attention this brings to our department?" Samantha crossed her arms, her expression unwavering. "Maybe you should have thought about that before your deputies decided to manhandle a man in front of my diner." The sheriff's face hardened. "You don't understand who he is." "I understand who you are, and I understand what I saw," she shot back, her confidence growing. He narrowed his eyes, frustration creeping into his voice. "This isn't about you, Sam. You escalated a situation that was under control." She leaned closer, her voice calm but firm. No, Sheriff. I recorded a situation that was out of control. You were the ones who decided to make a scene. The sheriff stood up abruptly, his patience wearing thin. You've made things complicated for everyone. No, Sheriff, she insisted, her voice steady as she leaned on the counter. The law is supposed to protect everyone. That's all I stood for. Nobody is above the law, not even your officers. He stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable, then turned to leave, muttering something under his breath. As the door swung shut behind him, the tension in the diner dissipated, replaced by a murmur of conversation as patrons exchanged glances, some in admiration, others in concern. Samantha took a deep breath, her heart racing, but she felt a surge of empowerment. She had stood her ground against authority, and while she knew this was far from over, she was resolute in her commitment to do what was right. The community was watching, and she was ready to face whatever came next. It was clear that her actions had sparked something much larger than a simple confrontation. They had ignited a conversation that would reverberate throughout Franklin and beyond. As the weekend rolled in, the atmosphere in Franklin had grown increasingly charged since Samantha's confrontation with the sheriff. On Saturday morning, the diner was bustling with customers, but the air was thick with anticipation. News of Samantha's bravery had spread like wildfire, drawing mixed reactions from the townspeople. Some viewed her as a hero, while others labeled her a troublemaker, concerned that she had disrupted the peace of their small town. That morning, as Samantha was preparing the day's specials in the kitchen, the sound of rumbling engines filled the air. She paused, looking up from the grill, a sense of unease creeping over her. One motorcycle pulled into the parking lot, followed by another, then a whole procession of them. They came to a halt, parking with a deliberation that suggested they were there for a reason. Samantha stepped outside, arms crossed, as she recognized the lead rider, Jake Mitchell, still clad in his leather vest. "Is this about what happened the other day?" she asked, eyeing the group of bikers who had now gathered around their bikes, their presence intimidating, yet respectful. Jake removed his helmet and nodded slowly. "It's about what didn't happen and what you did," he said, glancing around at the dozen or so riders behind him. "Word got out. Our club brothers saw that video. You stood up for one of ours." Samantha shook her head, trying to downplay the situation. "I didn't do it for a club. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Jake cracked a small smile, appreciating her humility. "Exactly. And we want to show our support." She raised an eyebrow, suspicious. "You're not bringing trouble to my doorstep, are you?" "No, ma'am," he assured her. "We came to eat." Samantha sighed, glancing back at the diner. "All 200 of you?" she asked, half jokingly. Jake nodded, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Word's already out. They're coming. We don't forget who protects their own." By noon, the diner was filled to capacity. The gravel lot was lined with motorcycles, turning the small diner into a vibrant hub of activity. Customers who had once been hesitant now mingled freely, sharing tables and stories, while news trucks gathered outside, cameras rolling to capture the unfolding scene. Inside, the atmosphere was surprisingly calm. The bikers treated Samantha's diner with utmost respect. They passed menus, ordered politely, and tipped generously. Samantha worked the grill, her hands moving deftly as she prepared plates of catfish and ribs. She glanced over at Mara, who was wide-eyed with disbelief as she poured drinks for the bikers. "You okay?" Samantha asked, noticing the teenager's nervousness. "I think so," Mara replied, her voice shaky. "I've never seen anything like this." Samantha grinned. "Then pay attention. This is what happens when you treat people with respect." Outside, the murmurs of discontent from a few locals who disapproved of the bikers' presence could be heard. But inside the diner, barriers were breaking down, and the simple act of sharing a meal was fostering a sense of community that had been missing. As Samantha continued to serve, she felt a sense of pride swell within her. This was more than just a diner. It was a place where people could come together, regardless of their backgrounds. And through her actions, she had sparked a movement that was reshaping the narrative of her town. As Sunday dawned, the energy in Franklin was electric. Samantha arrived at the diner early, eager to prepare for the day ahead. The previous day's influx of bikers had left a lasting impression on the community, and she could feel the buzz of curiosity and excitement in the air. The local radio station was already buzzing with talk about her, broadcasting snippets of her confrontation with the sheriff and the subsequent support she had received from the motorcycle club. By 8 a.m., the diner was filling up quickly, drawing in not just locals, but travelers who had heard about the place from social media. As the door swung open, a diverse crowd walked in. Bikers in leather jackets, families in casual attire, and even a couple of journalists with notepads in hand. Samantha moved through the kitchen with purpose, flipping pancakes and grilling sausage, all while keeping an eye on the dining area. Jake entered a bit later, limping slightly but maintaining a cheerful demeanor. "You look busy," he said, grabbing a seat at the counter. "Just trying to keep up," Samantha replied, pouring him a cup of black coffee without waiting for him to ask. "How are you feeling?" "Old injuries acting up," he admitted, stirring his coffee. "But I'm good. Everyone's talking about what you did. You really stirred the pot." Samantha shrugged, not wanting to dwell on the attention. "I just did what anyone should do." While she worked, she noticed the mix of patrons in the diner. Some locals sat nervously at tables, casting wary glances at the bikers, while others seemed eager to engage in conversation. The tension was palpable, but Samantha remained focused on her task, determined to maintain an atmosphere of respect. Around mid-morning, a tall man in a sharp suit walked in, his presence drawing immediate attention. He approached the counter, pulling out a worn photograph from his pocket. "Do you remember this man?" he asked. "Say, your system," sliding the photo across to her. It showed a younger man in a leather vest. Samantha's heart sank as she recognized him. "That's my brother. He passed away last year," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "He always talked about you," the man continued, his eyes reflecting warmth. "He said there was a woman in Franklin who helped him when no one else would. He wanted me to come here and thank you." Samantha felt a rush of emotions. "I didn't know he had passed," she replied, her voice barely a whisper as she turned to prepare a plate filled with ribs, potato salad, and coleslaw. "No charge," she added, placing the food in front of him. The man smiled, gratitude evident in his eyes. He'd say, "That's just like her." As Samantha returned to her duties, she felt a mix of pride and sorrow. The diner was no longer just a place to eat. It had become a sanctuary where stories were shared, connections were made, and respect was earned. The vibrant community that had formed around her actions was a testament to the power of standing up for what was right. Little did she know, the day was far from over, and challenges were still on the horizon. As the sun rose on Monday morning, the buzz around Sam's diner intensified. The previous days had transformed the diner into a focal point of community conversation, and the atmosphere inside was a mix of excitement and apprehension. Samantha arrived early, her heart racing with anticipation as she prepared for the day ahead. The local radio was still abuzz with her name, discussing her stand against the sheriff and the support she had received from the motorcycle club. By the time the doors opened, a line of customers stretched out onto the sidewalk. People from all walks of life, locals, bikers, and curious travelers, came to experience the diner that had become a symbol of resilience. Samantha moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, her hands busy assembling plates of breakfast and pouring coffee. The diner smelled of bacon and fresh coffee, a comforting aroma that felt like home. However, as the morning progressed, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling of tension in the air. She sensed that not everyone was pleased with the newfound attention. A few locals had parked their cars across the street, watching the diner with skepticism. Among them, a group of men stood near an old pickup truck, arms crossed and faces stern. Just as she set a plate down in front of a customer, the bell above the door jingled again, and in stepped Sheriff Thompson, flanked by 2 deputies. The mood in the diner shifted instantly, conversations fading to whispers. Samantha's heart sank as she recognized the familiar faces, their presence commanding the room's attention. "Can we talk?" the sheriff said, his tone firm. Samantha wiped her hands on a towel and stepped out from behind the counter, meeting his gaze head-on. "If you have something to say, you can say it in front of everyone," she replied, her voice steady. The sheriff hesitated, glancing around at the packed diner. "We have a situation," he began, lowering his voice. "These bikers, some of them have records. We've received reports of threats and intimidation." Samantha crossed her arms defiantly. "From whom?" "The only threats I see come from the deputies. These people are eating here like everyone else." "Your diner is becoming a circus, Samantha," he said, frustration evident in his tone. "Is it a circus when people treat each other with respect?" She shot back, her resolve hardening. "They're here because they feel welcome. Something you and your officers should learn from." The sheriff's jaw tightened as he struggled to maintain his composure. "You keep pushing, and things will get difficult." "I'm not pushing anything," she replied, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm simply standing up for what's right. If you have a problem with that, maybe you should look in the mirror." With that, the sheriff turned and walked out, his deputies trailing behind him. The tension in the diner lifted as the door swung shut. Samantha took a moment to breathe, feeling the weight of the situation. She looked around at the patrons, who had been silently observing the interaction. Their gazes were a mix of admiration and respect. "Let's keep serving," she said, her voice breaking the silence. As she returned to the counter, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Little did she know, the events of the day would push her resolve even further. As the sun rose on Tuesday, the atmosphere in Franklin felt charged with anticipation. The events of the previous days had sparked a fire in the community, and Sam's diner had become a melting pot of conversations, opinions, and emotions. Samantha arrived at the diner early, ready to face another day, knowing that her actions had resonated far beyond the walls of her establishment. By the time the doors opened, a steady stream of customers was already lining up outside, eager to experience the diner that had captured national attention. The air was thick with the aroma of breakfast cooking on the grill, and Samantha moved through the kitchen with a confident rhythm, flipping pancakes and brewing coffee. She could feel the energy of the crowd, a blend of curiosity and support as people gathered to see the place, where she had stood up for what was right. As the morning progressed, she noticed more unfamiliar faces among the usual crowd. Journalists, travelers, and even a few local officials had come to witness the diner that had become a symbol of resilience. Samantha handled the rush with grace, all the while keeping an ear tuned to the conversations around her. She could overhear snippets of discussions about respect, community, and standing up against injustice. And it filled her with a sense of pride. Just after the breakfast rush, a familiar figure walked in, Jake, sporting a wide grin. He approached the counter, visibly energized by the support he had received. "You're making waves, Sam. People are talking about you everywhere," he said, taking a seat. "I didn't do it for the attention," she replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. "I just did what I thought was right." But as the day continued, the challenges became more pronounced. A group of men she recognized from the previous week stepped into the diner, their expressions tense. They were the same locals who had previously expressed their disapproval of the bikers. One of them, a man named Mark, shouted across the room, "How long are you going to let this place be taken over by them?" Samantha stepped forward, her heart racing. "They're customers, just like you," she said firmly. "If you have a problem, let's talk about it like adults." The tension in the room was palpable as patrons turned to watch the confrontation unfold. The man scoffed, but before he could respond, Jake stood up. "You're missing the point. We're all here to support one another, and that includes everyone who walks through that door. This diner is about respect." As Mark hesitated, Samantha felt a wave of support wash over her. Patrons who had once been silent began to speak up, sharing their own stories of standing up for what was right. In that moment, the diner became more than just a place for food. It transformed into a community where voices could be heard. After the men left, the atmosphere shifted. Samantha looked around at the faces of the patrons, some she recognized, some she didn't. She felt a sense of unity that hadn't been there before. "Let's keep feeding everyone," she said, her voice steady. "Every last one of them." In that moment, Samantha realized that standing up didn't always mean making a grand statement. Sometimes, it simply meant continuing to serve with integrity and compassion. And as the day unfolded, she knew that her actions had sparked a movement that would continue to grow, bridging gaps and fostering understanding in her small town.